Now, this year marks the centenary of the Great War. Throughout 2014, Look North and your local BBC radio stations will bring you a variety of stories to commemorate the conflict. And we begin with the first of two reports from France, the site of perhaps the most infamous battle of them all, the Somme. It was there that soldiers from the north played a major part in one of the most brutal yet little-known aspects of the war, deep underground. Jerry Jackson has tonight's Look North report.
They've been called silent cities of the dead. The cemeteries dotted for hundreds of miles along the Western Front. Nowhere are they more plentiful than here on the Somme. And in 1914 it was pure chance that put one tiny village at the epicentre of events that have haunted us ever since. This is La Boiselle. A lot of blood will be shed over it. The German invaders were coming this way. The French forces, desperate to stop them, met them here. And this tiny 3.5-acre plot of land on the Somme would become one of the most bitterly contested patches of the Western Front. Here the front-line trenches were so close and well fortified that men began digging underneath their enemies. In this area alone there are 5 miles of tunnels. 30, 80, 100 feet deep. Their aim, to blow their adversaries to bits.
Watch your head as you just come through here.
This labyrinth lay abandoned and unexplored for almost a century.
When you cut chalk, it's sharp. It's sharp and it's bright, bright white. Here, you can see it's blackened by, there would have been a candle sitting in there. Again, in here as well. And it just sort of brings the human touch into it once more. And that's what it's all about. It's about the men who fought here from all sides.
In 2011, a team of archaeologists, military historians and respectful enthusiasts began the huge task of unblocking the tunnel system. All of them are unpaid volunteers. 2 or 3 times a year they gather to uncover and learn a little more.
It's a huge privilege to be able to work on a project like this. It's a contact with the past, it's a contact with my family's past. You know, what they endured at this place, you just can't imagine it.
When the British inherited these tunnels from the French in 1915, they began preparing for the battle that would end the stalemate of the trenches. Hundreds of miners, many straight from coal, iron ore or mineral collieries in the north, intensified their efforts, knowing each moment could be their last.
It's not the physical exhaustion, it's the mental exhaustion. And many men could only do this for a few months, knowing that every breath, every sound, every clatter, any movement at all that could be picked up by the Germans may well be the sound that signals your death knell.
These men, they're almost a different race. They lived in civilian life under incredibly harsh conditions compared to how we live today. Many of these men here, in fact most of them you could probably say, didn't even have the vote, and yet here they were. And that's all to do with a sense of duty. Kitchener, do your duty, fear God, honour the King. That's it, you do as you're told.
The miners were hand-picked for their experience and temperament, but the donkey work of shifting those thousands of tons of chalk fell to the ordinary infantrymen.
They were there simply as beasts of burden to help the tunnellers, and they did that for 8 hours. Most appalling drudgery, and this is what you find in their accounts.
In spring 1916, men from the Lonsdale Battalion of the Carlisle-based Border Regiment took their turn as those beasts of burden. A few of them managed to leave a very personal mark.
It's very easy to persuade yourself that the spirits of those men are still here.
2 massive mines were prepared either side of La Boiselle. Here was where the German front lines would be obliterated and the enemy sent into headlong retreat. That was the plan. After their labours underground, the bordermen, Carr, Henderson and Chard, would take their places in the trenches among the rest of their comrades, ready for what they called the big push. What we call the Battle of the Somme. Jerry Jackson, BBC Look North, Northern France.
Now, yesterday we told you about the soldiers from the Border Regiment who signed their names deep underground on the walls of a vast tunnel system beneath the Somme battlefield in France. Well, the complex was abandoned after the First World War, and the names were only discovered as archaeologists began recent excavations. Today, in our second Look North report to commemorate the Great War centenary, Jerry Jackson reveals what happened to the three men and how you can help in the search for their descendants.
In the rolling hills above the Somme is one of the many memorials to the fallen. But this one is different. 73,000 British and Commonwealth names are carved here. Not the sum total of the dead, just the ones whose bodies were never identified or never found. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme, nowhere was the death toll heavier than around La Boiselle. For almost a century, the miles of tunnels dug by British, French and German miners lay unexplored. Now a team of volunteers is uncovering them.
For those men who cut this in the first place, in the middle of the war, it just must have been unbelievably hard. And this is, what, 40 metres?
The La Boiselle Study Group is a band of unpaid enthusiasts, united by respect for the men who fought and died in a war waged in silence, until your explosives killed your enemy, or his killed you.
To be able to enter these tunnels as the first people really since the end of the war has been something really quite astounding. Yet at the same time, at the bottom of this shaft, we know that we are just a short distance away from the remains of men that were buried alive.
In fact, there are 38 men known to be entombed here. It will stay their resting place. But from the surface layers, as we were filming, the remains of 8 British, French and German soldiers were being excavated. The archaeologists handle all such discoveries with reverence. Even the litter of war makes you wonder whose hands last held it.
I like the fact that you actually get to see and touch and work on objects that people have actually used. People's food tins, just very simple, you know, knives, forks and spoons, and I think that's quite nice to add to the picture. It's sort of adding the people back to those sort of stories you hear about the war.
Deep below ground, a handful of men from the Border Regiment left us something even more personal. Their names, pencilled in the chalk. They were infantrymen requisitioned for work underground. The La Boiselle group would like to trace their descendants and bring them here.
Those signatures have been there for nearly 100 years and they are as fresh as the day they were made. And when I first saw them, I was blown away. And I thought that because that's such an amazing piece of history and it's so fresh that I feel that the relatives, if they're interested, would be love to have a chance to come out and see it.
At the Border Regiment Museum in Carlisle, I hoped to find details of the Lonsdale men's experiences in March 1916. The battalion diary simply tells us they were working parties for the Royal Engineers, the tunnelling company, and that 3 of them were wounded.
So they were taking, you know, the same risk that a lot of people have focused on that the tunnellers faced, that if something went wrong underground, whether it was a natural thing like a collapse or actually fighting underground, they would be there as well. The other important thing is that all the preparation side of it, this is one of the great logistical things of World War I, that this tunnelling and all the preparatory work for a great big battle in July.
And that was the Battle of the Somme. 2 massive mines were exploded either side of La Boiselle, but after the colossal toil above and below ground, the attack here was a failure. The Tyneside Scottish and Irish lost especially heavily, and of the 800 border men who went into action, more than 500 were killed or wounded that first day alone. But what of our Lonsdale trio? All 3 men attacked the German lines that day, and all came through. And although William Carr was wounded, he too survived the Battle of the Somme, but not the war. Jerry Jackson, BBC Look North, the Somme.
Amazing story. So, are you a relative of William Carr, Obadiah Henderson or William Chard, or can you help us find any of their descendants? Well, if so, contact us via our Facebook page, or you could, of course, drop us a line the old-fashioned way.